There is a number in every pilot's HMD that is not a weapons count, not a radar confidence percentage, not a closure rate, or a bearing, or an altitude. It is a fuel quantity displayed in pounds or kilograms, depending on the aircraft, updated continuously, counting down at a rate determined by throttle position, altitude, airspeed, and the specific demands of whatever the aircraft is doing at any given moment. The number has a threshold. When the fuel quantity reaches that threshold, it stops being a resource and becomes a constraint. The threshold has a name: bingo.
Bingo fuel is not the point at which the aircraft will run dry. It is the minimum fuel quantity required to return to the recovery base or ship at normal operating speed and altitude, fly the approach, and land with a small reserve. It is calculated before every mission, adjusted for current wind conditions and ship position, and carried in the pilot's working memory as the line that cannot be crossed without requesting priority recovery and accepting that whatever was happening in the airspace will happen without that aircraft's participation. A pilot at bingo fuel is not done. A pilot at bingo plus nothing is done. The difference between those two states, at the moment it matters, is measured in seconds and fuel flow rates. At 9:44 a.m. over the South China Sea, the F-35C section had been airborne for 2 hours and 19 minutes. They had launched from USS Theodore Roosevelt at 7:25 a.m., taken fuel from a KC-135 at 8:10 a.m., and been on CAP station since 8:32 a.m., holding a racetrack 140 nautical miles east of the Spratly Islands in support of a P-8A, conducting a maritime patrol track to the north. The CAP station was not eventful. It was routine maintenance of presence, 2 aircraft visible on every Chinese radar in range, a standing signal that the airspace was occupied by U.S. forces during a period of elevated PLAAF exercise activity near Fiery Cross Reef. At 9:41 a.m., the routine changed. 4 J-16 contacts appeared on the Hawkeye's picture, bearing 278 from the cap station, climbing from Fiery Cross Reef at 9:36 a.m., 5 minutes before the Hawkeye's relay had reached the section. The Link 16 picture populated with the updated data and showed the J-16 formation at 89 nautical miles west, altitude 24,000 feet, heading 092 east directly toward the cap station. The J-16S were flying in combat spread, KLJ-7A radars active. Standard intercept profile. The section responded as the mission brief specified. Turn to face the formation, go to LPI mode on the APG-81, build passive picture. The lead transmitted the contact update to the Hawkeye and received acknowledgement. Standard geometry, developing normally. At 9:44 a.m., the lead checked the fuel state as a procedural confirmation before beginning the intercept closure. The number was not what the pre-mission planning model had suggested it would be at this point in the sortie. It was lower, bingo plus 18. 18 minutes above minimum fuel for a standard recovery to the Roosevelt at the ship's current position and speed. 18 minutes was the comfortable margin of a sortie that had not required any significant deviation from the planned flight profile. Except this sortie had required a deviation at 9:17 a.m., when the P-8A had been tasked to extend its patrol track 40 nautical miles further north than the original plan, and the F-35C section had repositioned to maintain the coverage geometry, burning fuel at a rate the pre-mission calculation had not included. 18 minutes. The J-16 formation was 89 nautical miles west. The intercept geometry would require closing approximately 40 nautical miles before the J-16S reached the cap station's former position. 40 nautical miles. At Mach 1.02, the speed required to maintain tactical advantage against a Mach 0.94 J-16 formation, approximately 8 minutes of fuel at the intercept power setting. 18 minutes minus 8 minutes. Bingo plus 10 at the anticipated intercept conclusion. Bingo plus 10 was workable. The Hawkeye had already been informed of the fuel state. The Roosevelt was adjusting course to reduce the recovery distance by 12 nautical miles, which would add approximately 4 minutes of fuel margin on return. Bingo plus 14 at recovery was the updated planning figure. Manageable. At 9:46 a.m., the second contact group appeared on the Hawkeye's picture.
Not J-16S. The radar cross-section characterization on these 4 contacts was different. Smaller at ranges where the J-16S had been large and obvious. The Hawkeye's characterization took 3.4 seconds and produced the same RCS values that the previous J-20 engagements had produced from similar geometries, 0.07 to 0.12 square meters. Not J-16 values. Not any fourth-generation platform in the PLAAF inventory. The 4 contacts were at bearing 264, range 218 nautical miles, altitude 32,000 feet, heading 087, behind and northwest of the J-16 formation, following at 7 minutes of travel time separation. A second wave. The J-16S were the visible first element. The J-20S were the second element, positioned to approach the CAP station from a different bearing, after the J-16S had forced the F-35C section to commit to the first intercept geometry. The tactical architecture was immediately recognizable from the previous South China Sea engagements. J-20 stealth screen plus J-16 firepower. But this time, the J-20S were not the forward element. They were the follow-on force, positioned to exploit the geometry that the J-16 engagement would create. If the F-35C section closed on the J-16S and engaged them at range, the section would be 40 nautical miles west of its current position when the J-20S arrived at the CAP station's former bearing, 218 nautical miles east at 87 degrees heading, having crossed from their current position through open airspace that the F-35C section had vacated. The J-20S were not approaching the section. They were approaching the Hawkeye. The E-2D Hawkeye was at bearing 108 from the J-20 contact's current position. The J-20's heading of 087 degrees was within 21 degrees of a direct bearing on the Hawkeye. At 218 nautical miles and Mach 0.94, the J-20S would reach engagement range on the Hawkeye in approximately 21 minutes if the F-35C section did not address them. 21 minutes. The lead's fuel state at 9:46 a.m. Bingo plus 17. The Roosevelt's adjusted recovery distance, 162 nautical miles. The recovery fuel calculation with the J-20 intercept added to the sortie, executing a full intercept of the J-20 formation, 218 nautical miles distant, requiring closure to 60 nautical miles for fire control solution development, would consume approximately 14 minutes of fuel at intercept power. Bingo plus 17 minus 14 minutes. Bingo plus 3 at the anticipated J-20 intercept conclusion. Bingo plus 3. 3 minutes above minimum recovery fuel at 162 nautical miles from the ship, after completing a second intercept that would likely involve maneuvering, active radar, and the higher fuel consumption rates that engagement conditions produced.
Bingo plus 3 was not manageable. Bingo plus 3 was the number at which recovery priority became mandatory, and the decision to continue the engagement rather than turn toward the ship became a decision the pilot was not authorized to make unilaterally. The lead transmitted to the Hawkeye at 9:46 a.m. and 20 seconds. Sentry, Falcon lead. Second contact group bearing 264, range 218, assess J-20 elements, heading 087. J-20S bearing on E-2D position. Fuel state bingo plus 17. Cannot complete full intercept of second group and recover normally. Request guidance. The Hawkeye controller's response came in 41 seconds. Stand by, coordinating. 41 seconds. The J-16 formation was now 82 nautical miles west and closing. The J-20 formation was 214 nautical miles northwest and closing. Both distances were shrinking simultaneously. Standing by was consuming the one resource the engagement was running short of. The first friction event arrived at 9:47 a.m. The J-20 contacts KWS, 1 radars activated. Not full power, the same brief precision probe that had characterized J-20 sensor behavior in previous engagements. A single 1.2-second sweep toward the Hawkeye's bearing. Whether the KWS-1 sweep had resolved the Hawkeye as a trackable contact at this range was the critical tactical question. The Hawkeye's own APS-145 was a high-power, non-stealthy radar that had been operating continuously for 4 hours and was exactly the kind of large, easily resolved target that a fifth-generation AESA radar operating in its most sensitive mode would find at 214 nautical miles. The KWS-1 returned to standby. The J-20 crews had enough. They were closing on a confirmed bearing toward the Hawkeye, their positioning data verified. At 9:47 a.m. and 31 seconds, the Hawkeye controller transmitted.
Falcon lead, Sentry. CAOC guidance, prioritize J-20 intercept. J-16 formation handed to Roosevelt. CAP relievers, ETA 16 minutes. Acknowledge fuel constraint. You are authorized single-pass deterrent action on J-20 contacts. Minimum ordnance expenditure, then recover immediately. Bingo state acknowledged.
Single-pass deterrent action. Not a full intercept closure. Not a sustained engagement. One pass, build what solution was achievable from range. Conduct the deterrent transmission and lock that had worked in previous engagements, then turn for the ship. The authorization recognized the fuel constraint and shaped the permitted tactical action around it. The geometry of a single-pass deterrent action against a contact 214 nautical miles, distant from a current position where fuel was already limited, required a different intercept calculation than a standard engagement. The fuel to close 40 nautical miles to effective fire control solution range, approximately 5 minutes at Mach 1.04. The fuel to maintain station for the deterrent transmission and lock, approximately 2 minutes. The fuel to recover from the J-20 intercept position to the Roosevelt, approximately 11 minutes at best range cruise. Total, 18 minutes. Bingo plus 17 minus 18 minutes. Bingo minus 1.
Bingo minus 1 was below minimum recovery fuel.
The calculation had a variable that the standard recovery fuel estimate did not capture fully. The Roosevelt was moving. At 18 knots on its adjusted course, the carrier was closing the recovery distance at approximately 30 nautical miles per hour. In the 18 minutes of the projected engagement, the Roosevelt would have moved 9 nautical miles closer. 9 nautical miles at the return cruise speed reduced the return time by approximately 40 seconds. Not enough to bring Bingo minus 1 back above minimum. The calculation had a second variable, the tanker. The KC-135 that had refueled the section at 8:10 a.m. was at bearing 124 from the current position, range 230 nautical miles. Diverting to the tanker after the J-20 intercept, rather than recovering directly to the Roosevelt, added 68 nautical miles to the return route. Not an option from Bingo minus 1. The calculation had a third variable, the Wingman. The Wingman's fuel state at 9:47 a.m., Bingo plus 22. 5 minutes more than the lead. The Wingman had not executed the repositioning maneuver at 9:17 a.m. The lead had positioned while the Wingman held station, and the difference in fuel consumption from that single maneuver was now 5 minutes of operational margin. The lead transmitted at 9:47 a.m. and 52 seconds. 2. Lead. You have the J-20 intercept. I'll address J-16S from distance and cover your 6. You have Bingo plus 22, enough for single pass and recovery. I'll maintain 80 nautical miles on the J-16S and keep them honest. The Wingman's acknowledgement came in 2 seconds. The tactical division was clean. The Wingman, with 5 additional minutes of fuel margin, would execute the J-20 single-pass deterrent action. The lead, with Bingo plus 17 and declining, would maintain a deterrent position relative to the J-16 formation at extended range, close enough that the J-16's KLJ-7A radars would detect the APG-81 in active mode, far enough that fuel consumption remained at the lower end of the intercept power band.
The geometry split at 9:48 a.m., the Wingman accelerating northwest toward the J-20 contacts, the lead holding a slow closure vector toward the J-16 formation at 79 nautical miles west.
The lead's fuel state at 9:48 a.m., Bingo plus 16, and falling at a rate dictated by the partial throttle advance needed to maintain tactical position against the J-16 Saisu. At the current fuel flow rate, the lead's margin over Bingo was declining at approximately 1 minute per 2 minutes of real time. The partial advance was consuming fuel faster than cruise, but slower than full intercept power. The calculation was specific. The lead had approximately 32 minutes before reaching Bingo minimum at the current fuel flow rate. The Roosevelt was at 162 nautical miles. Return time at best range cruise, approximately 14 minutes. Operational time remaining before mandatory RTB, approximately 18 minutes. 18 minutes. The J-16 formation had not reacted to the section's split. Both contacts had continued their eastbound heading at Mach 0.94, apparently either not aware of the Wingman's departure or maintaining the intercept geometry regardless. The KLJ-7A radars on both formations were in search mode. Neither had activated fire control track. At 9:50 a.m., the Wingman reached 80 nautical miles from the J-20 contacts and activated the APG-81 at LPI mode. Fire control solution build commencing on contact 1, 44% confidence at 80 nautical miles. Contact 2, 41%. Both climbing slowly. The Wingman had approximately 14 minutes of fuel margin beyond what the single-pass intercept required. 14 minutes felt like luxury compared to the lead's arithmetic. At 9:52 a.m., the Wingman's fire control solution on contact 1 reached 71%. Not yet at the 75% employment threshold, but close. The APG-81 went to full tactical power at 9:52 a.m. and 22 seconds, the step that had produced heading reversals in every previous J-20 engagement. Contact 1's KWS-1 activated in 0.4 seconds. The response was faster than any previous recorded J-20 RWR response to an APG-81 full power activation. Not 19 seconds like the Mediterranean Su-57. Not 0.6 seconds like the first Pacific Raptor engagement. 0.4 seconds. The J-20 crew had a protocol prepared and had executed it before any cognitive processing delay could add latency. Contact 2's KWS-1 activated in 0.7 seconds. Also fast. Both J-20 crews in active fire control sweep mode, both sweeping toward the Wingman's emission bearing, both searching for an aircraft that the Wingman's frontal cross-section would make difficult to resolve at 78 nautical miles in 1 or 2 radar sweeps. The Wingman transmitted on guard at 9:52 a.m. and 39 seconds. PLAAF flight, bearing 087. You are in a fire control tracking solution. The E-2D is not a valid military objective. Reverse course immediately. At 9:53 a.m. and 4 seconds, Contact 1 turned. A hard left bank, 4G, nose pulling south. Contact 2 turned simultaneously. A mirror image right bank, nose also pulling south. Both turns were coordinated to a degree that confirmed the pre-briefed nature of the response. The J-20 formation was not reacting organically to a surprise. It was executing a planned response to an anticipated scenario. APG-81 lock, guard transmission, turn south. The reversal bore south rather than northwest, not directly back toward Fiery Cross Reef, but to a bearing that opened range from the Wingman while avoiding the obvious return heading that would confirm they were abandoning the Hawkeye approach. a professionally calibrated withdrawal that preserved ambiguity about whether the reversal was responsive to the deterrent or a planned phase of the sortie. The Wingman held lock through the reversal for 40 seconds, confirming that both contacts were on stable southbound headings with opening range. At 9:53 a.m. and 44 seconds, the Wingman released lock, notched to LPI mode, and turned southeast. Fuel state, bingo plus 11. 14 minutes to recovery. The Roosevelt at 148 nautical miles was now achievable. The Wingman transmitted the contact status to the Hawkeye and turned for home.
The second friction event was the Leeds, arriving at 9:53 a.m. and 51 seconds in the form of a KLJ-7A mode change on the northernmost J-16 contact. The radar shifted from search mode to single target track. The bearing of the STT-087 from the J-16's position, the bearing where the lead was holding its deterrent position at 78 nautical miles west of the J-16 contact. The J-16 crew had found the lead on their radar. The lead's APG-81 in active deterrent mode, not fire control track, but the moderate power search it had been using to maintain tactical presence relative to the J-16 formation, had produced a detectable return against the J-16's KLJ-7A at 78 nautical miles. Not because the lead's APG-81 was transmitting in the frequency bands the J-16 was best at detecting, because the APG-81's active mode, even at moderate power, had a radar cross-section interaction with the F-35C's own airframe at this aspect angle that had produced a marginal return. The J-16 had the lead on its radar. The fire control track was building. The lead's fuel state at 9:53 a.m., bingo plus 12. Fuel flow at current power, 340 kilograms per hour. Time to bingo minimum at current rate, approximately 12 minutes. Roosevelt at 156 nautical miles, 14 minutes at best range cruise. 12 minutes of operational time. 14 minutes of return time. The two numbers had crossed. The lead was past the window where completing the engagement and recovering normally was arithmetically possible. The APG-81 went to full tactical power at 9:54 a.m., not because the engagement called for it, because the alternative was being locked by a J-16's fire control radar at 78 nautical miles while trying to economize fuel, and the J-16 STT represented an operational threat that the fuel calculation did not override. The full power activation broke the J-16 crew's tactical momentum, the RWR in the J-16 cockpit receiving the APG-81's full power lock from a bearing that the J-16's own radar had just found was the same disorienting asymmetry that had been used against every adversary in this theater. The J-16 STT dropped to wide sector search within 4 seconds of the full power activation. The full power activation cost fuel at a rate approximately 18% higher than the moderate power mode it replaced. The lead held full power for 22 seconds, confirming that the J-16 STT had not re-established. Then back to moderate power. At 9:54 a.m. and 30 seconds, the lead transmitted to the Hawkeye. Sentry, Falcon lead. I'm at bingo. Turning for recovery. J-16 formation at 77 nautical miles, no fire control track active. Recommend Stinger relievers intercept on current bearing before J-16 is reached cap station. Bingo! Not bingo plus something. The 12-minute operational window had closed during the 22 seconds of full power activation. The lead turned to bearing 127, the Roosevelt's bearing, and advanced to best range cruise speed. The fuel state at the moment the turn was initiated. Bingo plus 1. 1 minute above the minimum. The math from this position to the ship at this speed was 14 minutes. The reserve fuel on recovery, negative 13 minutes equivalent. Negative 13. The calculation had exceeded minimum. The lead transmitted the priority recovery request to the ship's air traffic control and received an immediate expedite clearance response.
The ship was turning into the wind. The deck was being cleared. The Hawkeye controller relayed the J-16 situation to the CAOC, lead, F-35C RTB on priority recovery. J-16 formation 77 nautical miles east of CAP station, no active fire control track, Wingman RTB with bingo +8. J-20 formation reversed heading south, assessed as deterred. New CAP assignment required.
The replacement cap, the Roosevelt's Alert 5 section that had been sitting at idle on the bow catapult since 8:45 a.m. waiting, launched at 9:55 a.m. Both aircraft. The J-16S reached the former CAP station position at 9:58 a.m., found it empty, and held there for 4 minutes before the replacement section reached intercept geometry, and the geometry resolved as it always did. 2 F-35Cs in active mode on the J-16 formation's bearing, fire control solutions building, the picture familiar and its outcome already established. The J-16S turned west at 10:02 a.m. The lead's recovery at 10:09 a.m. was the most attention-generating three-wire of the rotation. Fuel on deck, 1,840 kilograms. The standard minimum for a shipboard recovery was 1,500 kilograms. The lead landed with 340 kilograms above minimum, approximately 22 minutes of cruise flight, which had started at bingo +1 and had been consumed in the 14 minutes of the return transit, plus the carrier approach sequence. The number confirmed what the arithmetic had said. It had worked. The margin was 340 kilograms. The margin between a successful recovery and a crew in the water was approximately 22 minutes of flight. At the fuel flow rates of the engagement phase, 22 minutes was the difference between bingo +1 and bingo -1. The debrief was 2 hours and 8 minutes and produced 3 findings. The first was the one the operational planning staff needed most. The fuel planning model for the CAP station had underestimated the fuel cost of the 9:17 a.m. repositioning by 11%. The repositioning had been a routine response to the P-8A's extended patrol track. In isolation, it was a negligible event. Combined with a second wave intercept requirement 9 nautical miles outside the planned engagement geometry, it had consumed the buffer that made the dual intercept sortie arithmetically possible. The update to the mission planning model when calculating CAP fuel requirements include a repositioning allowance of 15% above the planned profile's predicted consumption. The second finding was tactical. The Wingman's 5-minute fuel advantage had been the operational variable that made the tactical split possible. The split had worked because one aircraft had enough fuel to complete the J-20 deterrent action, and the other did not. If the fuel states had been reversed, lead at bingo +22, Wingman at bingo +17, the split would still have been possible, but the specific conduct of the J-20 deterrents would have been different. The tactical flexibility that the fuel difference enabled was not designed. It was the residual benefit of the lead's larger consumption from the repositioning. A consumption disadvantage at 9:17 a.m. had become a tactical flexibility advantage at 9:47 a.m. by creating asymmetry between the section's fuel states. The third finding was the intelligence one. The J-20 crew's 0.4 second and 0.7 second response times to the full power APG-81 activation were the fastest recorded in any previous engagement. The trend across engagements was visible in the collected data. Each successive J-20 engagement had produced faster response times than the previous one. The J-20 force was updating its intercept protocols based on operational experience, and the response time was decreasing as a result. The implication for future engagement planning, the deterrent action window, the period between full power activation and the J-20 turning was compressing with each operation. At the current rate of protocol improvement, the window within which the deterrent action produced a heading reversal before a PL-15 employment decision was made would eventually be shorter than the current engagement sequence required. That trend line was the most important number in the debrief. It was not on the fuel gauge,
1 F-35C section, 4 J-16S, 4 J-20S, 1 E-2D Hawkeye protected. Bingo +1 at LED's RTB call. 340 kilograms over minimum on deck. J-20 response time, 0.4 seconds. Trend direction, faster. Ordnance employed, 0. Both formations reversed. Replacement cap launched in time. The fuel state had been the tactical frame for every decision in the engagement from 9:46 a.m. onward. The South China Sea at 10:30 a.m. was as it always is. Disputed airspace above blue water, the replacement CAP on station, the P-8A completing its extended track. The Roosevelt's fuel report for the section's recovery was logged in the maintenance record with a notation that the mission planning model required revision.
The revision would be ready for the next rotation. The next rotation was in 6 days.